Hi, fellow PTA member, and thank you so much for tuning into our video on getting ready for elections, the PTA transition and succession guide. It's very important as PTA members, having served on our executive for a year or even years, to ensure that we leave our executive in good hands and as well as that we have done everything as best as possible to hand over to the person that is coming to take over your role. So take a listen to this guide. At the end of the day, what we really want is the best for our students, what we want is the best for our parents and for our school community. So we should be taking every possible step that we can to ensure that any new unit that comes into place has all the information that they need to move forward and that they can continue what you have done as PTA members as well as grow what you have done as PTA members. So let us take a look, take a listen, and take your notes. Moving on to the agenda, we also appointed in the last meeting a transition and succession planning committee, especially now as we are going into a very heavy election period. As you all know, your PTA elections are due by the end of September. So the chair of that committee is our first vice president, Alison Medina Lacroix, and she is going to go through what she has prepared for us so far. You unit officers will have to make sure that you're prepared for election, that you know what forms you need to have, what you need to do in terms of succession planning, why it's important. So I'm going to hand over to her now so that she can do that presentation, as well as go through the next item on the agenda, which is the election process. And I'm asking you all, please, although we are recording the meeting, make sure that you're taking your minutes and your notes. We are going to provide the presentation so that you can have access to it. But please ensure that you digest the information and at the end of it, ask any questions that you feel fit. All right, so Madam First Vice, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon again, members.
You need me to
Madam
share
President,
screen, right?
yes, please.
Yeah, okay.
Right, so while
Just
we're
give me
waiting
a
for the
minute, right?
president
Yeah.
we bring up the presentation. We know that September, October, November is when most units of schools host their elections. We've recognized that's a standard pattern. So we know that season for us is very busy. And we want to make sure that part of the problem we're having is that the continuity. There are many units that fall by the wayside. Like Madam President would have indicated, we would do election one year and the next year when we go back, there are just a few members working. We want to build our PTA to the point where we have a continuously strong PTA. We should be able to go into a school and say, well, this PTA has been in existence and functioning and working for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. That's the goal we're looking to achieve. And there are a few ways to do that. And one of those ways is what I'm going to outline this afternoon. Right? So we're going to cover things like goals and outcomes, timelines, moving from one PTA executive to another, role handovers, what to do before, during, and after elections, required documents and dues, succession planning, risk and controls, and coming up with an action plan.
All right, it's up. If you can just confirm that you've seen it and you'll just let me know when to go next.
Yes, you could go ahead.
Okay, also in the meantime, I'm seeing a lot of messages in the chat. I'm going to ask the secretariat just to monitor it and bring attention anything that we need to address, but there is a question and answer segment at the end of this.
Is I would have indicated this is what we will cover in the session, so I'm going to try and make it as brief as possible. Right. So preparation ahead of elections. Ideally, well, of course, we all know that unit term of office is 1 year. So you basically have, well, you should say 9 because, I mean, we have a couple of breaks in between our terms, and a term is usually roughly around 3 months. So basically, PTA unit has 9 months to work with regard to achieving their goals and objectives. And therefore, it means before you turn around twice, you're looking to have elections again. You should be scheduling to have elections again. So ideally, getting ready ahead of elections requires some preparation on behalf of the outgoing executive, right? And that preparation begins with an analysis of what the PTA has done for the past year. Ideally, a PTA should have a plan of what they want to cover, clear objectives of what they want to cover during their tenure. And of course, what the PTA will now have to do is to make sure they look at their plan and their objectives as opposed to what they have done, and do an analysis based on that to see if they have met their objectives, if they have accomplished their goals laid out in their plans, and if their plans are proceeding in the time frame that they wanted them to, right? And all of this should be placed in a report. So if, per se, the president of an existing PTA has decided, well, maybe their child is no longer in the school and it's time for them to step down, and they can simply hand over a report to an incoming president, and that president is now able to hit the ground running, right, with knowledge of all the PTA has been doing, what they've been hoping to accomplish, how they've been trying to accomplish those goals, without now have to sit down and try to figure out what the PTA has done and where the PTA needs to go, because that does take time, right? And that could be time spent actually focusing on accomplishing, putting plans in place, or implementing initiatives to complete those goals and plans, right? These preparations or these analysis should cover all areas: leadership, which is the president's, finance, the treasurer, the welfare officer, education, the education officer, and publicity, the public relations officer, right? And like I said, this is to ensure that any new officers that are coming into any of those roles, particularly, has a full understanding on the ongoing plans of the PTA. Because, for instance, there are some units that may have an activity or event that it did so well, and was so well received, they decided to make it an annual event, right? To ensure that that continues to be an annual event, persons who are coming in need to be aware of it, what was done, how it was accomplished, and the outcomes. So they can either continue with it or improve on it as they go forward. So, and it's easier when they have that information in hand. Next slide, Madam President. Right, so the handover for the presidents should include reports on past the executive strategic plan, any ongoing projects, key contact information for stakeholders. For example, they should hand over or share with a new incoming president, principal's contact, social worker for the school supervisor assigned to the school, regional and national contact information. The president should also give an outline of the operations of the PTA. For example, meeting dates and times, the platforms, how the meetings are conducted, whether they're all physical, virtual, or a combination, and methods of communication, whether it's phone call, WhatsApp, Zoom, Teams, however, the methods of communications that exist. President should book a PTA sensitization session at least 2 weeks before the proposed date of the election, so that anybody who's looking to take up a position will be aware, right, and enthused and encouraged on being part of the PTA. The president should hold discussions with members of the executive with the aim of identifying members that are willing to continue to serve on the PTA executive and those who will not be returning to their roles, so that when you're heading into elections, you know, like, okay, I have officers who are willing to continue to serve in these roles. I may simply be looking to add to that with regard to incoming officers. Next slide, Madam President. The secretaries should have prepared copies of all minutes of previous meetings, as well as any correspondence. This could be hard copy or soft copy. Secretary should also prepare a listing of contacts, phone and email for stakeholders and key contacts for the PTA, for example, corporate sponsorship, constituency representatives, etc. Additionally, secretaries should provide access to the PTA email if one exists. For the treasurers should provide copies of all financial reports that would have been submitted throughout the year, as well as copies of all receipts, ideally physical and soft copy. There should be a financial report on each fundraiser held by the executive. And the treasurer should also have all cash in hand ready, any ledgers, receipt books, and the PTA's bank account information ready to be able to hand over if they're handing over their position to a new incoming member. Welfare officers should have strategic plans for the welfare outline, as well as reports on any welfare initiatives that are currently outgoing. We know that a lot of issues that come up can't be resolved like one time. So it may be there may need to be an ongoing follow-up, and therefore we need to have these recorded so that that information can be passed on to a new welfare officer that may be coming in. The welfare officer should also have outlined a process for how issues are raised with the PTA, tracked and resolved, as well as how emergencies are handled. Welfare officers should have in hand contact information for key stakeholders such as social workers, guidance officers, student support services, etc. For education officer, they should have strategic plans for education outline, as well as reports on any education initiatives that are currently ongoing within the school. The education officer should also have information on support that the school is receiving, for example, the number of student aides, etc., and identify any gaps that may need to be addressed by an incoming education officer. For the public relations officer, should have any strategic plans for PR outlined, as well as any PR initiatives that are currently outgoing. The PRO should also have contact information for key stakeholders such as sponsors, alumni, and community leaders. And our trustees, of course, should have a listing of any PTA items that are in hand. And those are the things that each of those officers should have prepared in preparation for, of course, if they are will be outgoing officers, to hand over to any officers that will be taking over those positions when we have a new PTA coming on board. Right, so now we're looking at the steps for holding an election. Ideally, when you have decided, or you know that this is the time for an election to be held, the first thing that the president should be doing is to book a PTA sensitization session to ensure that teachers and parents have a clear understanding of PTA. That is not only because I know in the past, I'm sure many presidents have experienced the fact that from the time you say we're having elections, that is when your attendance at the meeting tends to drop drastically, right? We want to make sure that our parents are motivated and they're hyped up and willing, right, to volunteer and give up their time to the PTA because they understand the dynamics and the role a PTA plays in the school. We want them to understand how important that is. And that will go a long way to ensuring that you have willing persons to volunteer their time to serve on the PTA. And we've seen where those sensitization sessions are doing exactly that and serving that purpose. The next step would be to email the region requesting officers to conduct your election, or fill out the election request form on the region's website at least 3 weeks ahead of the scheduled elections. Now, I know it may seem that there are a lot of regional officers but there are limited numbers of us who can conduct elections. And we are also working people, so we need to make sure that we schedule our time accordingly. So when you give us enough time ahead of the election, is make sure that we can assure that there's an officer available to conduct the elections for you. The next thing that you have to do is ensure that the reports, the required reports are completed and ready to be handed over to the region either on the day of elections when the officer arrives, or emailed the day before if elections are going to be conducted online. Now, I know I've seen it because I conduct a lot of elections myself. A little confusion with regard to the reports that are submitted. Now, the minutes that are required to be submitted during that meeting where elections are held is usually because that is when the school is, the unit is having its AGM. So it would have been 1 year since the past election, and therefore the unit would now have to have an AGM, give the parents reports and information on everything they've accomplished for the past year, and then conduct the election for a new executive. The minutes that are required to be submitted on that day are the minutes of the previous AGM. So the last meeting where the election was held and you had your AGM is the minutes of those meetings that need to be handed over on that day, not the minutes of the meeting that was held the month before or anything like that. So it would have been minutes from a meeting that would have been held a year previously. And then we have the president's report. Of course, a president's report, for those who may not be aware, is basically a synopsis or analysis of the performance of the PTA for the past year. You have the secretary's report, which is basically a detailed account of all the activities of the unit for the past year. So a secretary's report and a president's reports differ in that the secretary's report will simply give you an outline of all the things that were done, how many fundraisers were held, how many events you had at the school, how many meetings you had, those kinds of details. So basically, it's just a report on the things that happened. The president's report is an analysis of how those activities contributed to the improvement in the school. And then, of course, you have, your financial report, which is your year-to-date. So from your last AGM, when you had elections, up to this new AGM, a financial report that covers that entire period of 1 year. We will also need you to confirm 2 days before the scheduled date of election, the election will still be held, because I know sometimes you may schedule a date, but there may be something happening in the school, or there may be an event that means that we cannot hold the election again on that particular day. But we need to know in advance rather than us show up at the school and then only to be told, well, no, we're not having elections that day. Right? So I'd confirm at least 2 days before with the region with a follow-up email indicating that, yes, we are confirming that the election will still be taking place on the scheduled date. Right, and the fifth one is to ensure, 5 and 6 would be to ensure that your dues are on hand. If you have not submitted your dues as yet, ensure that you have your dues on hand to be submitted to the regional officers if you have not previously submitted them, and ensure there's correspondence. Right, so I know a lot of times we've seen where we've gone to elections and our requisite is that the person be present for the election. Anybody being elected into a position is present either in the online space or physically. However, we can make exceptions for persons who, due to to circumstances beyond their control, want to serve on the region. Sorry, my bad. We serve on the unit, but are unable to be there in person on that day. We do have some leeway for them if they give correspondence ahead of time to indicate that they're willing to serve, right? We can elect them without their being present, but we must have correspondence in hand ahead of time indicating such. And those basically are the steps for getting yourself ready for an election. So that covers basically getting ourselves ready for election. For me, succession planning is something that I'm very much connected to. My experience as a president of a unit, when I made the decision that it was time for me to step down from that position, I selected the person or identified the person who would be taking over as a president 2 years before that time. And I took that time to train that person on how to be a president, what is required for a president, so that when I stepped out, they had no issue, or they were able or prepared to take over the role, right? Succession planning, right, is very key to ensuring that our PTA units, executives continue to function. Part of the reason that our PTAs fall by the wayside is because people become overburdened, and we don't plan ahead for what's going forward. We keep our minds on the short term, and we don't really look at the long term. I mean, nobody is going to stay an executive forever and a day. That's a given. At some point, persons will have to step down, but we want to ensure that when you hand that the PTA, because somebody's stepping down doesn't mean that the unit falls apart. So succession planning goes a long way to ensuring that our PTA units continue to function. Okay, Madam President, you can go on to the next slide. Our PTA units continue to function. Right. So firstly, one of the why succession planning, it ensures continuity of leadership, ensures that gaps in decision-making programs, there are no gaps in decision-making programs on school family communication. It ensures that once we hand over, we transition from one executive to a new executive, right? There are no gaps with regard to everybody's aware from the get-go what's going on, where we're heading, what we plan to do, so that there's no fallout or losing of any programs that might have been in train, losing of communication with regard to parents and the school administration, and key stakeholders. We keep that momentum going with regard to continuity, right? It preserves institutional knowledge. So we have a historical context with regard to programs, vendors, fundraising procedures, and expectations. So we do not lose any information with regard to any of those things. Protects, like I said, protects program momentum. It ensures that anything that we have going on in the school, especially if it's an activity that we want to see happening continuously, like once a year, that and partnerships, that it continues and it survives even if we have a turnover of leadership. It reduces volunteer burnout, meaning that, of course, we shift duties, or we have clear divisions of responsibilities and predictable transitions, so no single person gets overloaded. It's very easy to be able to say, well, okay, I'm moving this activity over to this person, so that now this person has a new set of activities, and that they're enthused, or they have information, or they have procedures and knowledge of how to go forward, and they have a renewed vigor for the positions. Encourage volunteer development and retention, right? Like I said, it ensures that we grow and develop within the PTA, because I always say you can never leave PTA without learning something. It was my practice when I was a president that every year we took on like new parents in the roles of, say, coordinators, and that every year we would, well, as parents transition out, we move those persons up, so they got a better appreciation for new positions and the opportunity to practice the things that they have learned in the PT and develop themselves. And it minimizes the risk with regard to financial and legal vulnerability. That means we have all the records for minutes and that kind of thing, as well as we do not lose anything with regard to our financial viability. We have all our, we do our necessary transactions so that we do not, there's no misappropriation or lack of information with regard to, a lack of information or transparency with regard to our financial reporting obligations. Next slide, Madam President. Okay. So we run the risk when we don't do succession planning of losing critical records, account access, for example, access to the emails or access to our bank accounts and vendor relationships. So we may lose out on all those stakeholders that may be able to assist the PTA when we don't ensure that we have smooth handovers. There may be abrupt discontinuation or failure of events and programs. Repeated recruitment crises and short-lived leadership terms. It's very difficult coming into a new position and you're basically like a deer caught in headlights because you have no context from historical context from what is happening with regard to that position on the executive. And that more than anything else, we've realized is what makes people get disenchanted and want to not be part of the PTA. It's one of the leading reasons for that. There's also conflict or confusion over authority and responsibilities. And that, of course, leads to decline in membership engagement and fundraising effectiveness. And that's the end of my session for now.
I hope that you got some great value from that video. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Our email address is posted in the description of this video, as well as you can see it right here on the screen, or you can reach out to your region representative. See you next time.